if I really care about your belovedness, I'm going to invite you into this work and listen to you and be patient with you and love you. But if you care about my belovedness, then you're going to understand that there are systems that are continually oppressing me, like police brutality or like school systems. And you're going to do what you can to change those systems so that I can move through this world as a beloved.
Hi friends, I'm Amy Julia Becker, and this is Love is Stronger Than Fear, a podcast about pursuing hope and healing in the midst of social division. This is the final episode of this season, and in this season we've been talking about how we can respond to the brokenness in our own lives and in our society with our heads, hearts, and hands. And today, it's just a really fitting end to the season because I'm talking with Osheta Moore. She is the author of Dear White Peacemakers, and you're going to hear more about this book when we talk. I tried to restrain myself from gushing about it throughout this conversation because I figured that would be a little weird for her and that you would get a sense of why you should all buy multiple copies of it just by listening to us talk. I do want to say here, though, I have already pre-ordered 5 copies of this book. It comes out in the middle of May. And I did that because as I was reading an advanced copy of it, I kept thinking of people I had to give it to once it comes out. So I truly want to invite you to do the same. And if you've listened to this podcast before, you know that I am not always pushing books on you in this way. But I just want to say, I think this one is really worth having on your own shelf, reading it, taking notes, passing it along to friends, discussing with people. It's really beautiful and helpful and true. I also want to let you know we're giving away a copy of Dear White Peacemakers through this podcast. So if you want to enter to win that, share the podcast episode on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter and tag me when you share it. You can get the full details about how to enter the giveaway in the show notes. And as I said before, I am going to be taking a break from this podcast. This is the end of this season because I am working on a new book myself. It's a book about personal and social healing, and I really can't wait to tell you more about it. I would love to stay in touch with you while I'm away from the podcast, so please sign up for my monthly newsletter if you go over to amyjuliabecker.com or just message me with your email address and say I'd like to stay in touch. I send out a monthly newsletter that just keeps you up to date on what's going on in my life. So again, thank you for being here, and here is a conversation with Osheta Moore. Today, I have the honor of talking with Osheta Moore. She is the author of the about-to-be-released and truly phenomenal book, Dear White Peacemakers. Osheta, welcome.
Hi, Amy Julia. Thanks for having me.
I have been looking forward to this interview for longer than you even know,
Oh,
because
really?
I've been looking forward to it the whole time that I've been reading your book, but I was first introduced to you through your Dear White Peacemakers podcast series.
Oh, that's
right. And then I found you on Instagram. And so about a year ago or last summer, I really wanted to get you on the podcast. But then I found out you were writing this book. And I said, oh, okay, I'll wait. So I really have been wanting to talk to you for a long time, not only for my own sake, but also for our listeners' sake. It's really a gift to get familiar with your work. And I'm grateful for what you do. I want to start with asking you to introduce yourself and especially just talking about how you found yourself in the particularly pastoral role that you're in. So tell us about you and about your ministry, really.
Yeah. So hi. Okay. So I live in St. Paul, Minnesota. I love it here. Never want to leave St. Paul. I'm originally from Texas, though, so I'm a Southern girl at heart. And I live here with my husband, who's a pastor. He pastors a small congregation in St. Paul. And then I have 3 teenagers. So my oldest is 18, then I have a 15-year-old, and then a 14-year-old. So 2 boys and a girl. And I've been, so, a little bit about, I guess, my ministry is I really started blogging back, I think maybe like 12 years ago, 15 years ago, because my husband and I would have these like really intense conversations, and I had all these emotions and all these opinions. And one day he was just like, you have a lot of words about a lot of things. I think you need to start a blog. And I was like, no, I don't need to start a blog because my husband is really active online, and I was so scared of just the divisive. And like, if we think things are terrible right now, but things were pretty bad online,
Mm.
15 years ago. We're just, I think people were really into call out culture, really, really into. So calling out somebody, taking them down. There was just a lot of conflict online. I was like, I don't want to be a part of that because the faith tradition I'm a part of is rooted in nonviolence and peacemaking. And I was like, I don't even see how I can show up in that online space. And so what I decided was that if I was going to start doing any kind of online work, writing online, that I was going to have a distinctly peacemaking voice rooted around the Hebraic concept of shalom. And I define shalom as God's dream for the world as it should be, nothing broken, nothing missing, everything made whole, which means that God desires us to live in harmony with each other. And so I will do my best to seek peace and be at peace with others, especially in my writing. And at that point, my husband and I were planting a church in Boston, long story, and it was a peace church. And so there's just a lot of like things I could write online about peacemaking, and actually like asking myself the question, what if Jesus actually meant it? Like if Jesus actually calls us to be peacemakers, what does that look like? And how does that look in our everyday life? So I started that writing, and then I ended up writing my first book, Shalom Sisters, which was really just an exploration of everyday peacemaking for women. And in that book, I noticed that I wrote a lot about the intersection of my identity as a Black woman and the current racial climate in our country, and my call to be a peacemaker. There are a couple chapters in Shalom Sisters where I touched on how peacemaking and nonviolence comes up as I do that work. And I just realized that a huge part of Shalom begins with seeking peace in myself and peace with God. And so I can't be at peace with myself in my brown skin if I don't have conversations about systems of the world that make it hard for me to thrive. And I can't be at peace with God if I don't believe that God didn't make a mistake in giving me my brown skin. And so just coming to that place and doing that work and being really comfortable as a Black woman, having these conversations, I really went back to that place and that I began writing a line saying, if I'm going to do this work, I'm going to do this work from a peacemaking, nonviolent perspective, especially when I'm talking about these kinds of hard topics with white people. And I just kind of found myself in a bunch of conversations where I would talk about my journey with race and race conciliation as a Black woman, and white people would be interested in those conversations with me. And I just found myself kind of in this pastoral space where I'm talking about things that they maybe heard or learned from other people, but helping them break it down and ultimately like reminding them of their belovedness and their importance in this work, to where I found myself like just really having a deep heart for making sure that white people recognize, in the same way that I need to be at peace with myself and I need to be at peace with my God, that white people doing this work need to be at peace with themselves and their belovedness, knowing that God didn't make a mistake in giving them their European features.
Right.
And so that's really where that kind of aspect of my ministry kind of came up. Then I started doing this thing online where I would write to Dear White Peacemakers, which was my intentional way of calling in white people, saying you matter to me. So dear white, dear, and then white, like it's important for you to be able to be at peace with yourself and say like God didn't make a mistake in the way he made me. And also because I'm white in this country that's in the middle of this racial reckoning, I have a unique role and have a unique calling to engage with it because of my ethnic identity. And so in my book, I try really hard to neutralize the idea of white and also say like there's nothing wrong with being white, where I think in other places that's been pejorative or an attack. And then Peacemakers really like goes back to the calling that I feel that I want to invite them in to understand the nature of this work is making peace, not being peacekeepers. So we are actively binding up brokenness and filling in systems of resisting systems of oppression, and that's doing peacemaking work together. And so I can't do peacemaking work with you if I don't choose to live at peace with you. So that's kind of like how all of that came together. And so my husband's a pastor of a small church. I pastor alongside with him, but then I pastor at a larger church as outreach and teaching pastor here in the Twin Cities too. So I, teach, and then I also lead classes on these concepts of anti-racism, beloved community, and peacemaking. I'm leaving tomorrow to take a group down south to do a civil rights pilgrimage. So that's just kind of where my ministry kind of like flowed. And I'm really grateful to be in this space to have these conversations.
Well, I'm really grateful to have you here because I think that you're book has touched on so many. I mean, you've already intimated at some of them. I think there are a lot of white people who, in whether it's the past year or the past 10 years, have just started saying, okay, I really need to pay more attention to the racial injustices, to my role in it, to what it means to be white. And I'm confused and I'm hurt and I'm defensive and I'm just asking lots of questions. And I want to, and on some level, have the capacity to withdraw because it's really uncomfortable and scary. And so having some spaces where it's still going to be uncomfortable and scary, but you're not going to be condemned, seems, and where there's a promise of, you know what, if we do this together, guess what we get to do? We get to make peace. I mean, that's a really awesome promise. So I want to talk about anti-racism for a minute. It's a word and an idea that, at least for me, is relatively new. I think that's true, again, for a lot of white people. But it has come into more of the mainstream of American life in the past few years.
Yeah.
It sparks a lot of controversy. There are, books like How to Be an Anti-Racist or White Fragility that you mentioned in your book that, again, have been sparking a lot of white people to, quote unquote, do the work to understand racism and whiteness and all of these things. And yet, I think it has also sparked controversy in terms of people feeling ashamed and guilty and like, what am I supposed to do? Apologize for who I am? Those types of questions. So I think you do a wonderful job throughout your book of saying you are fully on board with anti-racism. Like, you're about that. But that all of the tactics that some anti-racist systems, programs, books, seminars, et cetera, have employed are not peacemaking tactics. And so I'd love for you to talk about what are some of the more like critical anti-racism policies and practices? How are those harmful? And then what does it mean to be an anti-racism peacemaker? There is a distinction between the type of anti-racism that you are advancing. And I'd love to talk a little bit about those two ways of moving in the world.
Yeah. So the way I describe it in the book, and the very first caveat that I make whenever I do this description is that I want to be really clear that every Black leader or Black educator or BIPOC educator on anti-racism bring their whole selves to this work. And so they do this work with their core convictions, with their theological frameworks, even with their North Star in mind. And so while my way is different and my way has been helpful for some, I know that their way has been helpful for others. And so I want to be really clear to say that while I don't always employ those same tactics, I honor the work and the diligence of those BIPOC leaders and recognize that I've learned from them in some ways, and I've had a lot of clarity on how I want to do this work. But for me, the way I describe how I came to this third way, if you will, of doing anti-racism that I call anti-racism peacemaking, is that I found that in churches that I have been a part of, mostly in the 90s and early aughts, whenever we talk about this stuff, whenever we talk about race and division, and it's usually under this umbrella of racial reconciliation, which often emphasizes scriptures like there's neither Jew nor Greek nor male nor female, or that Jesus came to end enmity and hostility and make unity. And there's a huge emphasis on the unity aspect of of racial reconciliation, of like, hey, we're called to live in unity with each other. We're called to love each other. You're my brother in Christ. You're my sister in Christ. This is often where we sometimes get the unhelpful idea of like colorblind, or that there's like one race. And so what I have found when as being a Black person in predominantly white spaces that would teach racial reconciliation is that there's a lot of interpersonal healing and peace between each other. Like, I knew that the white people in my church loved me really well. Right. Here's what I didn't know. I didn't know the white people in my church understood the systems that I deal with when I'm not in church with them. Right. And understand the reality of my life, and had any interest in dismantling those systems and building something new. So as I started doing the work of coming into my own as a Black woman and wanting to build a world that was safe and thriving for people who look like me, who look like my children, I kind of swung to the other side, which is primarily what, like, I call it anti-racism. So like what you would see in books like How to Be an Anti-Racist or White Fragility, like you mentioned, this hyper awareness of the systems. So like the North Star, so if you would say the North Star of racial reconciliation is that, hug a Black friend, we're all in this together, like, unity in Christ. I would say anti-racism, their North Star is burning it down, like new systems, holding white people accountable, repairing the harm to BIPOC people. Yeah. And so there's a lot of like really good systemic work on this end. But often what I found is that I was encouraged to not really care about white people or their feelings, or that if a white person was legitimately was experiencing emotional trauma and doing this work, well, it's fine, it's good. Like that's part of this work. And that just didn't sit well with me either, because I have such a framework that we are all made in the image of God, we're all beloved. And I know that for some of my white brothers and sisters, they have worked really, really hard to get to the place of being beloved and knowing that they're loved by God and knowing that they're made in the image of God. And then when they start doing this work, there's this expectation that they have to take on this shame or self-hatred in order to fully enter this work. And if they don't, then they're centering or they're being selfish or whatever. And that just didn't sit right with me either. So I had to go through this journey of kind of figuring out what works for me. And what has worked for me is doing what I call anti-racism peacemaking, which is an active commitment to dismantling the systems of this world that continually oppress people of color, that reinforce white supremacy culture, which is this idea that white people are better and that their ways of are better and that they should thrive and at the expense of people of color. So I'm actively anti-racist, but I'm a peacemaker too. And so anti-racism peacemaking chooses to use techniques, tactics and techniques that are explicitly nonviolent, that are rooted in empathy, and that move us towards the realization of becoming the beloved community. And I describe the beloved community as a community of people who own their belovedness, proclaim each other, who own their belovedness and proclaim each other's belovedness. And if we can get to that place, I feel like if I really care about your belovedness, I'm going to invite you into this work and listen to you and be patient with you and love you. But if you care about my belovedness, then you're going to understand that there are systems that are continually oppressing me, like police brutality or like school systems. And you're going to do what you can to change those systems so that I can move through this world as a beloved. So that's my North Star. It's the beloved community. And it's really rooted in this idea that I am a peacemaker and I am anti-racist and I can be both.
Thank you so much for that. I have a couple of quotations from your book that I noted that just are going to underline what you just said, but I want to read them here. This is a really short one. I've seen so many white people reject their belovedness thinking they're rejecting white supremacy, which I think just speaks to what you were just saying. And then this is a longer one where you write, "You white peacemaker are not just white. You are not the stories of oppressors and the master's whip. You are not the greed that ended Reconstruction after the Civil War. You are not Jim Crow terrorism or prejudiced neighbors. You are not the school to prison pipeline. You are not police brutality." And you go on giving all sorts of examples here. "You, white person, are beloved, a fellow peacemaker who is caught up in a system of white supremacy. Come, let's have a meal together." So again, I think those words just echo what you just described. And you also give a number of examples in the book of stories of your own encounters where you've had to put peacemaking into action in terms of not only your own belovedness, so like retaining your own sense of self-worth and care, but also the belovedness of someone who might be even actively opposing you. And I wondered if you have any of those stories from the book that you'd be willing to share here. I remember one from your civil rights journey that you took with some white people, one with your son's coach, one in thinking about the death of Ahmaud Arbery. Those are the ones that came to mind for me, but really anything you'd like to share. I'd just love to give an example for people.
Yeah. So I have a chapter in the book called Your Name Is Not Racist, It's Beloved.
Mm.
And that chapter for me, I wrote that chapter as I was reflecting on the day that I saw the Ahmaud Arbery video, his murder, the video of his murder. Um, and as we know, it happened in January, it happened earlier in the year, but it wasn't released until later. I
Yeah.
believe it was released in May,
Mm-hmm.
early May, because at the end of May, George Floyd was murdered. And so I had posted something about how disgusted I was and how disturbed I was and how I couldn't get past the idea that this was somebody who was just out on a Sunday run, and he was hunted down and he was shot by a father and son, one who was a former police officer. And I just posted that. And in that post, I really wrestled with how I was going to share this on Instagram. Instagram is so tricky because I never know like what is the right image to fully convey these ideas. But I posted three different things. I posted a conversation between Toni Morrison and an interview of Toni Morrison where she just talks about how racism is as detrimental. She used the word deleterious, but like how not it's not only detrimental to people of color, to Black people who suffer because of racism. It is detrimental to the people who enact racist ideas and policies, who are caught up in the system of hatred or even ambivalence about the violence towards Black and brown people. And then the next thing I posted was some kind of calls to action that I found. And then the last thing I posted was a picture of the McMichaels, father and son, after a hunting trip. So they were all in their camo. They had their guns. I think I can't remember exactly, but it was a picture of them, and that was really important for me because part of my nonviolent peacemaking practices um, is to hold on to the humanity of people, to recognize that Jesus died for every human being. And if he died for them and they matter, they should matter to me too. And so sometimes when I am struggling with loving my enemy, which is what Jesus calls to do in the Sermon on the Mount, I will go and look at pictures of them, and I will spend time creating a backstory about them. So I looked at this picture of this father and son and thought about like they maybe had a really wonderful day together, they maybe shared some interesting stories and they laughed together. Like these are two people who did a really horrible thing. So I shared all those and I really struggled with those three pictures. But what I had noticed, and this typically happens sometimes, is sometimes I will see white people who are doing anti-racism work will signal that they care about this work so much that they will say hurtful or angry things about the white people in those pictures. And I understand where that anger comes from, and understand where that impulse comes from. But that just wasn't the kind of space I wanted to host online. And so what I ended up doing on Facebook, because you know how Instagram sometimes shares over to Facebook. This didn't happen on Instagram; it happened on Facebook, where I just basically and I listened to the book, some of the things that people were saying about the McMichaels, but then I just commented and said that we're not going to do that here. That these are people who Jesus loves, and I'm not going to undermine my peacemaking by attacking them. And I do want them to be held accountable for their crime, and I do want them to have a reckoning with their own bias and their own hatred. And I do want their hearts to be changed. I deeply believe that nobody is too far gone, but I'm not going to use violent tactics or violent words to get to a place of peace. I don't believe that. I believe violence only begets violence. It doesn't beget peace. And so that was one of the spaces where I kind of had to do that work of here's my standards. This is how I can proclaim their belovedness, but also how I can maintain my standard of loving out of that deep place of belovedness. Because I know that God loves me, and I know that God was grieving alongside with me, and I don't need to say hurtful things about white people to have that validated. And I actually feel like for me, it's a really dangerous place to get into to attack white people who are blind to this or who are willfully ignorant to it. And so that was one of those spaces where I had to choose anti-racism peacemaking over retributive anger or violence.
Right, absolutely. I want to get back to the idea of belovedness, but before I do that, I feel like it might be a good time to ask about your just living in St. Paul, which is to say essentially Minneapolis right now, because you have lived there for a couple of years now, which is to say through the murder of George Floyd, through the protests last summer, through the events of these past few weeks, both with Derek Chauvin's conviction as well as Daunte Wright's death. And I would love to just ask you, what has it been like to practice peacemaking in your city and in your context right now?
Yeah. It's so what's funny is when we were in LA, Philando Castile was shot in Falcon Heights, which is like a small little suburb, not really a suburb, like a small little area, literally like 7 or 8 minutes from my home, so very close. And that was a real important moment for me in understanding the importance of doing anti-racism work and it being a part of my spiritual formation, that I just couldn't ignore it, or I just couldn't ignore talking about this. There was something, I think it's just a cumulative effect of so many Black and brown lives lost, and then kind of just scrolling on and seeing Philando murdered. Just really shook me. And so I always had in the back of my mind that that we would end up in the Midwest and possibly end up in the Twin Cities for a whole bunch of reasons. But then when that happened, I thought we would probably end up there because there was a part of me that really wanted to be a part of what the church was doing in this city. But then things kind of happened. This was back when we were in LA, like I said. So things kind of happened. My husband ended up leaving his associate role and accepting a call here. And when we moved here, one of our close friends was like, "Yeah, this city needs more peacemakers because we're in the middle. She said something like, we're like, it's a powder keg of racial tension here, like." And my husband's white, so we talk about race and anti-racism quite a lot, just to figure out how we can, be a healthy interracial couple. So when George Floyd happened, I had written like 2/3 of Dear White Peacemakers, and it was truly like a how-to book. It was, it was more, here are some definitions, here are some key moments, and it was a very one of those kind of books. Then George Floyd happened, and my husband and I went to several protests. And one of the things that the Lord just kept having me pay attention to was all the white people for whom this is very, very new. Yep. And yet their hearts are incredibly broken, and how they were in such a tender place because they're experiencing this trauma in a new and deep way that they have maybe not been equipped to deal with it. And I also have this strong sense of, there is going to be a need to call in and create space to have these conversations that's not predicated on tragedy and death. I even said to my husband on a drive home from one of these protests, like, do you think that they'll still be interested in this when there's not like another death, another shooting? Will they still be interested? And my husband was like, some will and some won't. And for me, I was like, we've got to find a way that's rooted, that's a way to do this work that's rooted in something life-giving and hopeful, and not relying on more Black tragedy.
Right.
And so the book then completely changed. And I know I freaked my editor out like so bad when I was like, it's a completely new thing. Because my deadline, it was May when George Floyd happened. My deadline was August.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, it's a new book.
We're starting over.
It's completely start over. And really, what came from me paying attention to the white people in my life who were responding to George Floyd's murder, who were having new conversations, who were having maybe the same conversations over and over again with their family members who were feeling overwhelmed. I sat with one friend and she was like, I'm just so exhausted. And this was a friend who like went to all the rallies, who was posting all the time. And I was like, it is okay to rest. Like, you are a human being. And like, if you're going to do this work for the long haul, which you've got to have a long haul view of this work, you've got to take care of yourself. And she broke down crying because I just don't think that that's something a lot of white anti-racists are hearing, is that you have got to take care of yourself. You're not decentering the work if you take care of yourself. And if you're afraid that you won't be able to stay in this work unless you continue working yourself, hustling for it, then we have to have another conversation about why you're doing this work, and what's your North Star, and how can that be life-giving and hopeful for you.
Which does actually bring us back to this concept of belovedness, because I really resonated deeply with you have an insistence that the only way the work of peacemaking can happen, especially over the long term, is through an understanding of ourselves as God's beloved ones. And really crucial to that is this sense of self-care. And I'm wondering what that looks like for you, and what it means to stay rooted in belovedness for you, but also for white peacemakers.
Yeah, that's a good question. I used to Summit 2 on the Enneagram. I don't know how familiar you are with the
I'm a
Enneagram.
1.
Okay. So I used to really take a lot of pride in how present I can be for others.
Yeah.
And you've heard that adage, like, you should talk to yourself like you talk to your best friend. I had to start being like, you should take care of yourself like you would take care of other people. Because I am so good, because I've just cultivated that in me for so many years. I'm so good at anticipating what somebody could need. Like, I could meet somebody and within a short amount of time, I could anticipate, oh, they're ready to have their glass refilled, or whatever. I mean, if you read the book, I feel like it's just like a two, like all of my two-ness. Because I'm like, come sit down, you're in my house. Like, it's very, but I have to create that like space of comfort and come sit down, like, be okay, just being Osheta. And so part of belovedness for me is doing really practical things like getting my hair done, or getting a pedicure. Like, I feel really special when I can have somebody take care of me, and I don't have to take care of myself. And I have this might sound a little controversial, but there are some Black friends that I turn to be able to just kind of have like Black only spaces or Black only conversations, where I can just be like, there's something really beautiful and good about our culture and about our community. And not to say like I don't love my white friends, but like, when I'm constantly in these spaces, I can forget that, like, be at peace with myself as a Black woman. And so I do have these check-in moments where I'm just like, let's just talk about the culture, girl, or like tell me how parenting is working for you, or how are you doing your hair, or did you read this thing online? And I have Black friends that I process things, and that feels like a special gift of belovedness, because she's beloved as a Black woman and I'm beloved as a Black woman, and we get to reaffirm that to each other. And I think a huge part of belovedness for me is honesty. And so if you follow me online, I don't have a problem with telling people like I'm exhausted and I'm not posting today, or like, hey, like I do these breath prayers in the morning on my social, and it's like sometimes 2-3 times a week, depending on what my schedule can allow. And sometimes if I just don't feel well or awake, or I like we've had a new diagnosis in my family. One of my kids was diagnosed as type 1 diabetic. And so I was like not getting enough sleep because I was paying attention to his blood sugar all night. Like I'm honest with people that I'm human and I need rest. And I know that for leaders to say that's I think it's kind of profound for some people to hear a leader just in general say that. But I think it's really, really important for my predominantly white audience to hear me as a Black woman say, oh no, I value myself enough that I have to rest. And I'm not always going to keep, pushing myself harder, because I'm beloved and I don't have to earn my worth, and I don't have to prove anything to God, and I'm not going to do that for you, because I feel like that would undermine your capacity for owning your belovedness. So
For me, I'm certainly still on a journey to understand my own belovedness as well, but one of the most profound ways for me to understand it has been through our daughter Penny, who has Down syndrome, because when she was first born, I really needed to understand, what does it mean for her to be beloved, and what does it mean, and how can I understand that myself as well. And I found that one of the ways for me to understand that was actually in thinking about limitations or needs, and not just saying, oh, she's limited and needy, but oh, so am I. And I think, again, as like a white, able-bodied, educated person, I had been so conditioned to pretend like I don't have needs. It's not true, but to recognize that actually when I admit my needs to God and to other people, that is what allows people to demonstrate love for me. Also, for me to demonstrate love for myself and not having to strive and earn and prove. And so I just think it's so interesting the way in which being able to rest, being able to be needy and limited and honest, all those things you just said, actually almost reinforces or can reinforce that sense of belovedness. Within all of that, so one thing I was thinking about when I was reading your book, and just some of the other books I've been reading, and I've been, again, just thinking about this from the perspective of a white, educated, stable, all these things, privileged person. So I've been thinking about the difference between, if there is a difference, between comfort and care. So I'm going to try to explain what I'm thinking about. So I have a lot of comfort in my life. I can buy more or less, not a yacht, but I can buy what I need in order to make myself comfortable. And I've been conditioned, I think, in life to not be uncomfortable. And when I do feel discomfort, I think I move really quickly, almost instinctively, towards what will make me comfortable or towards what will numb that discomfort. So I do that through overworking, because I can just plow through and not notice the feelings, or I can do that through alcohol, through food, through Netflix, through social media, right? All of those things can either numb or just kind of ignore discomfort. But what I was thinking about is okay, so in order to ignore discomfort, I'm not caring for myself with any of those things, right? Drinking another glass of wine, staying up late, scrolling through Instagram, or working too hard. None of those things are actually caring for myself. They're all avoiding discomfort, but they're not care. And I think sometimes, sometimes when I'm avoiding discomfort, it is to get out of engaging with the pain, grief, anger, hurt, injustice in the world, and specifically that many of my Black and brown brothers and sisters have no choice but to experience every day. And so I've been trying to think about how I can care for myself but not avoid discomfort, right? Entering into those painful spaces in love and self-care, but not with this avoiding discomfort. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. So, I used to, I taught a class called Reconciling Love on, anti-racism peacemaking. And I had a conversation with somebody who was sort of just saying to me, she wants to have all these hard conversations with her family, who don't believe that race is an issue. They're very much under the racial reconciliation umbrella of we're all one human race. And even saying white or even saying Black, saying racial identity, that's causing division. And so she was explaining to me that she's having these conversations, and that she would just get so upset, and she just wouldn't know what to say. And so she just kept pushing and kept pushing. And so I suggested to her, I said, okay, well, how about the next time you have those conversations with your, because what I sensed for her was that she was trying to push past the discomfort, but she was actually putting herself in a place of emotional and physical exhaustion. She just, then she wasn't thinking straight, and then she would get really mad and say something she didn't mean, and then the conversation would spin out, and then she would walk away, and she'd be like, why did I do that? And then she just felt like she was not paving a good way for the next conversation and all that. And so I was like, well, what if you said this? What if you said in a conversation with your family members, they say something that's really that feels really unhelpful, or they say something that's racist. I want to stop here real quick, uh, Amy Julia, because I want to make this distinction before I finish this. I don't call white people racist because I don't like attaching that word to somebody who's beloved. But I will say that ideas and words and systems are influenced by racism or white supremacy. So when I say that her family said something racist, I'm not calling her family racist, but I'm saying
Right.
like maybe the thing that they said was influenced by racist ideas. Okay, so if I said so, I say to her, going back to the story. So,
Yeah.
so say they say something that's racist, you can say to them, like, what you just said really makes me sad because I think that you don't realize how hurtful that thing that you just said is. And I'm really grieving because I know so many brown and black people who, if they heard you say that, like they would be weeping, like they would be so offended. And I don't think that you want to offend somebody. So I think maybe I need to take a break and kind of think about what you just said and maybe kind of get my thoughts together. And then I'll come back and maybe share with you a little bit about why what you just said was really hurtful if you still want to hear. But I just don't know that I can continue having this conversation with you unless we have a conversation about what you just said. Instead of just telling them like what you said is wrong and da, 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 and then they keep pushing back and saying, no, it's not. I was like, what if you just called in the moment and said, like, this is what I'm feeling? And I think I need a break. Like I don't have to keep pushing this conversation. And that was so for her, she just didn't, because I think in her mind it was, I've got to keep at it.
Yeah.
I've got to get them to understand. And here I was, a black person, saying, like, if you keep pushing that way, you're exhausting yourself, you're exhausting them, you're not moving forward in this
Right.
conversation. So maybe you have to have a little bit more patience, and you have to show your humanity a little bit and saying, like, gosh, that just really hurts. Like when you say all lives matter, like that really hurts because I'm seeing all these black people for whom their lives don't matter. And I really got to think about that a little bit. And so maybe we just table this conversation. And, you know, I gave that to her, and I have, honestly, I haven't heard back from her. So I can't say like I had a woohoo moment, but I
Right.
could tell in watching her process what I was saying, she was like, oh, that's a way for, I could tell she was taking it as, oh, that's a way for me to care for myself as I'm doing this work of like, I don't have to keep pushing in these conversations where somebody is resistant. And I don't have to front like I have it all figured out. I can just be
Mhm.
honest with my humanity. So that's one suggestion that
Yeah.
I offered. But I think that there is something about that comfort versus care piece um, that I want to kind of touch on is that I talk a lot about the idea of white supremacy culture, and it's the culture that I guess a lot of us would recognize as American culture, really, because it's really rooted in like data and status and strength and
Mhm.
comfort. And so there is this sense of when what I've noticed is that when a white person does this work and they want to push past like their sense of discomfort, oftentimes it's because they have like some sort of goal or some sort of like
Mm.
standard that they're trying to meet to prove themselves
Mm.
worthy. And that's what I was noticing with this person. So that she was trying to tell me the story that she was like, see, look, like, see, I'm doing the work. And I was like, actually, like, that's hustle culture. That's white supremacy culture, making
Mm.
you feel like you have to meet some sort of standard. What I really want you to do is to be beloved and human in these conversations,
Mm.
because the only way we're going to create a world where black and brown people are treated as human is if we all bring our full humanness to this world, to this work. And so,
I love that. And I think that is a really insightful, you know, it's striking to me just how much that sense of what's the goal, how am I going to get there, and then even I mean I was having a conversation with a friend the other day who was like, oh well, doing this doesn't check the box of anti-racism, and my friend was like, you know, if you're trying to check the box, then you're not doing anti-racism work. Like I mean, that
yeah,
was her response, was like there's something wrong with even just the idea of checking the box, as opposed to I'm going to get it wrong. I am not doing it all at once, but I am endeavoring day by day to engage in a loving work in the world that does dismantle, to the degree that I can, white supremacy, racism, injustice in our land.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time, but I do wonder if you have any, for the people who you were seeing last June, kind of in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and the people who you wrote the book for, do you have any sense of first steps, or, here's a way to start entering in to your belovedness, into peacemaking, into this work without getting, completely overwhelmed or swallowed by it, in a way that allows for a really lifelong commitment to the way of shalom, of peace, as you were describing before.
Yeah. So I think the first thing, so there are, well, let me give you like maybe three small things.
3 is great.
Okay. So I think the very first thing is I deeply believe that stories change the world. And so, and I'm just going to assume that that if you are into this work or you're just not thinking about it, it's probably because it was tied to some recent tragedy like Dante Wright or George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, something like that. Or it might be tied to maybe a black friend in your life is deeply grieving and is now more vocal about this, and you're like, wait, what? So I think that the first thing is make space to learn the stories of BIPOC people, whether that is the Black friend in your life who is willing to sit with you and share how she processed the verdict. I have a whole part of my book where I talk about how to invite a Black friend out to have these conversations. If there isn't anybody in your life like that, which I know that that's a reality for some, begin listening to podcasts, begin finding YouTube videos, like learning about the stories of Black people, and not just our stories of tragedy, which there are, but also our stories of joy. And so just to kind of get out of your white centered worldview to understand kind of how we move through the world. And also I think that'll be super helpful in going back to the thing I said at the beginning of our conversation, that there's such a diversity among Black people. You'll start to hear and learn different things from them. And I say start with stories. And then I would say find a Black leader, or a person of color, a BIPOC leader, who is talking about anti-racism that you can learn from. And that's why I say, like, there's so many of us out there. Maybe I'm somebody that you will listen to and learn from. Great. Like, but there's so many. There's Austin Channing Brown. There's Maisha T. Hill. Like, there's so many of us. Rachel Cargo. Like, there's so many of us out here. And so Latasha Morrison. So go and find and then learn. Follow them and learn from them. And then I think the last thing that you need to do is, or what I would encourage you to do, is to really do some intentional work of owning and acknowledging your belovedness. And I know that sounds so really weird, but I think that oftentimes we don't see the humanity of others because we've neglected the humanity in ourselves. And so if you can start cultivating spaces where you can say, what does it mean to be beloved? What does it mean to be like, what is the weight of Jesus dying on the cross for me? What does that mean? And how can I accept that gift? And then how can, out of the abundance of gratitude and acknowledgement from that gift, love others? I think doing some work around belovedness is really important. And I always suggest doing that work with a trusted pastor or a spiritual director or a friend, reading Life of the Beloved together, exploring these concepts of being like, I'm beloved. I think it's so, I cannot emphasize this enough. I think it's so important for white people to not feel less than, or feel like they have to beat themselves up in doing this work. I said this to my friend the other day, like, I don't want you to set yourself on fire to keep me warm, because that's not the world I want to live in. And so I would say those three things: learn stories, find a leader, and practice your belovedness.
I think I was struck by this sometime recently that before Jesus begins his public ministry, before he's tempted in the desert and proves himself in any way, the first moment we have of his adult life is before anything has happened, God saying, "This is my beloved son." And I just thought,
Yeah.
oh, that's such a good reminder to me that the belovedness comes first and everything else comes from there. And if I do not return to that, I mean, all the time, then I will either burn out or hurt people or manipulate or try to control or just, I can just name more and more things that will go wrong if I don't continue to try to return to that place for myself. But also, as you said, that is what gives me the eyes to see who my beloved fellow human beings are as I go through the world as well.
I will just say this because I for some, belovedness feels scary because there might be a fear of like, am I just contributing or practicing more white supremacy because I'm white and I'm running around here saying I'm beloved? But what I have found, I'm not afraid of that, because what I have found is that when we understand our belovedness apart from anything that we did, like that God looks at us and says, "You're beloved and you didn't have to do a single thing," then I feel like that really does level the playing field in this really beautiful way where I don't have a desire to lord over you anything, because you're a beloved as much as I'm a beloved. And my hope and desire is that as a white person, when you own your belovedness, then you start to see, like I said earlier, the ways in this world is set up that prevent me from fully living into my belovedness. And so you want to make that, you want to make that happen. You want to participate in that. And so I for me, I just really feel like belovedness can be the great equalizer that we need in this world. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the right place to end this conversation. Thank you so much. And again, we will make sure in the show notes to direct people not only to your book, but also to your social media, because you do a beautiful job there. We will be really grateful for whatever else you put out into the world in the future. So thank you for being here.
This was fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Love is Stronger Than Fear. I would recommend finding Osheta on social media. And I do want to remind you that we are giving away a copy of Dear White Peacemakers. And if you want to enter to win that, share this podcast episode on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter and tag me when you share it. You can get all the details about this giveaway in the show notes. As I mentioned at the top, this is the final episode of this season of the podcast. You can head over to my website, amyjuliabecker.com, for more resources related to the podcast. That includes the short book that I wrote called Head, Heart, Hands. It includes a spot where you can sign up for my newsletter so we can stay in touch. There are also a lot of other great conversations in this season. So if you missed them, I highly recommend looking back at the list of guests and topics and just starting to listen to some of the conversations that happened earlier this year. I learned so much from every one of them, and I'm sure you will too. In upcoming seasons, we will definitely continue to talk about personal and social healing. So go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. I know it's funny to do that at the end of a season, but if you do that, then it'll show up in your podcast feed when we start up again next fall. And if you have any guests you'd like to recommend as I look ahead, please reach out to me. My email is amyjuliabeckerwriter@gmail.com. All right, I know that's so many announcements, but I still want to conclude with a few words of thanks. First to you, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this podcast. Thank you for telling me what resonated with you. And thank you for engaging with the work of social healing wherever you are. I also want to thank our co-host, Breaking Ground. And I also always need to say thank you to Jake Hansen for editing and Amber Beery for doing so much to put this podcast together and put it out into the world. I'm so grateful for their help. Okay, so that's all of my thanks. And now for a final goodbye for this season. As you go into your day today, I hope you will carry with you the peace that comes from believing that love is stronger than fear.